Where are my southerners at? You have a south-facing room, arguably one of the holy grails of room exposures to pick paint colors for. But here we are. You need some help on finding some paint colors for that south-facing room. Well, if you haven't already seen our explainer video on how to pick colors, or at least how to work with colors in south-facing rooms, I'll leave that video in the cards up top. If you really just want to know some colors that I would lean towards, let's talk about some. Like the video and let's get into it. The first color I would steer you towards is Stonington Grey by Benjamin Moore. This color choice is arguably one of the safer options in a south-facing room, and let me get into why I think that. Southern exposures tend to be warmer overall, and if you watched our explainer video, you'll know that the natural light that comes through your windows will cause your paint colors to appear a bit cozier and a bit warmer leaning. Stonington Grey is seen as a middle gray, both in its depth, but also its undertones. In a vacuum, it's not a gray that really screams blue or beige. To me, it just assertively states gray. In a lot of cases, however, Stonington Grey tends to look cooler than it actually is based on that natural lighting we get, or even cooler artificial lighting for that matter. If you have a lighting exposure that isn't on the south side, maybe it's more often than not in the shade and perhaps northern leaning, then Stonington Grey has a tendency to look pretty frigid as a color. But if you have a south exposure, that means you don't have to worry about any of this. In a south-facing room, Stonington Grey does two things. It ditches that sometimes cool aspect in favor of a more earthy, dare I say, slightly taupe-leaning gray, and also the amount of depth in it gives it a strong sense of color throughout the day. Even during the brightest part of the day, you will not have to worry about this color fading into nothingness visually because of the brighter amount of light. For those of you that were curious about using Stonington Grey, but were scared that it would look pretty cold in certain circumstances, that's not the case here because you have a south-facing room, so rejoice. We next go to a similarly dark color, and by dark I mean it's kind of a mid-tone. We have a color called Blue Porcelain. So south-facing rooms have a pretty significant dose of that warm light, which we talked about. It's very common for people to pick cooler colors to settle that or balance it out. Personally, I do enjoy doing that, especially with colors that do have just a touch of warmth to keep it feeling balanced. And I'm also a fan of doing that myself, but the cool colors that I tend to favor have a touch of warmth somewhere in the color concoction, just to sort of settle things all together and really emphasize that sense of balance. That's what you get with Blue Porcelain because it is a beautiful tone of blue that has a slight fogginess to it that pairs beautifully with warmer creams and beiges, which may be present with all that warm natural light in the area. I chose it because you also have to think of how your lighting is going to affect the other things in your room, not just your walls. If you have some accessories that are maybe a pale wood, that doesn't have really a lot of apparent color saturation or hue present, that warm light is going to make those accessories look a little warmer and maybe a little more beige or tan even. Beiges with Blue Porcelain are just really a match made in heaven in my mind. So go with a color like Blue Porcelain to work with the other elements in your room. Another phenomenal color that I like to use sort of piggybacks off of Porcelain Blue, but is a much deeper color that is truly a beautiful accent choice. Water's Edge is in the deep mid-tone category of colors, and it's also known as James River Grey. Hello, awesome name. And it does have a similar undertone when compared to Blue Porcelain, although with warm lighting, it can appear a bit more of a deeper, cool teal. This allows you to use one over the other depending on how bold you want to go, or you can even use them in conjunction and they'll sort of do separate things in the same space. So up until now, we've spoken about three colors that are either cool or can be deemed as cooler colors. But what if you're not crazy about blues or even greens? Well, then maybe you'll be a fan of a color like Going to the Chapel. This is a lighter neutral or off-white color that is going to feel pretty subdued overall. It's one that I see used in color palettes that incorporate more creams and beiges, even though it's actually a little more gray than you might think. This is another consideration you have to make about your south-facing windows impacting everything else in the room. But why I like this one in particular is because it'll definitely warm up quite a bit without feeling overly orange or yellow. That's because it's balanced pretty well with its gray aspect. If you go much warmer, then I fear that your wall color will just blend into everything else in the space, especially if you're really into that French vanilla, Swiss coffee, creamy type of color in your accessories and your furniture. But going to the chapel still goes with those types of colors, but has enough of a difference with its gray aspect to be present. For my last color, this one may be a little polarizing to some of you, but I wanted to present an option that wasn't gray, beige, or remotely blue. This color would work really nicely with those warm rays coming in from the south. It has an LRV of 77.87, which is quite light, so maybe not something that would be optimal for a room where you use it around lunchtime, but perhaps the perfect choice for a color to wake up to in the morning. Silky Smooth is a color that has a very light, velvety pink tone that I feel suits a bedroom exceptionally well. It's soft and silky as a color, and because it's a pink that is toned with gray and isn't overly fiery or coral leaning, it comes to life even more in those south-facing rooms with that beautiful dose of yellow and orange light. Let me know which color selection you enjoyed the most and if you would use any of these colors yourself. If you want to know more about the other exposures, I have all the explainer videos up for you so you can jump to the one that applies to you. Not sure if I'll get into northwest or southeast exposures unless we get a ton of requests for them. So it's on you, my fellow paint people.